Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Okay, so we last left discussing your parents, and I think we discussed a little bit, because we kind of meandered around a lot, but I think generally speaking we mainly talked about both of your parents. We talked a lot more about Grandpa. I'd like to talk a little bit more about Grandma's family at some point, but I want to hold off on that because also I think that's going to add context later when we're talking about Grandma and the 90s and the aughts and how complicated that situation got. But I think right now, since we're mainly talking about you, let's start with the obvious. What do you know or remember about your birth and how and where it took place? And do you remember anything about what you were told about the parts of your life that before you can even remember your first memory?
Well, Mama tells me that.
You might want to hit record now.
Well, to begin with, I already hit it, so I recorded all that other stuff. So, Mama tells me that
there'd be days like this. There'd be days like I know I'm supposed to when I'm interviewing you. I was supposed I'm not supposed to I'm just supposed to let you talk.
That's
but
okay.
when you do that particular thing, I just have to. Anyway, sorry. Please continue.
I know.
Anyway, apparently my father really did not want any more children, and I was a surprise.
Now that's interesting. I'm terribly sorry. You said more.
He had 3 children by his first wife. Right. My father didn't want any more children. My mother actually did want more children. My father may have sneaked off and gotten a vasectomy or something. Who knows? But she said that she always kind of wanted another, but honestly, in later life, watching her interact with her animals, I understand a lot of my issues aren't just from my father, they're from my mother as well, because my mother, as far as dealing with, but when she wants somebody around, she wants them around, and when she doesn't, she wants to put them away, like a doll or something, and she gets really annoyed and kind of angry and mean when they're around and she doesn't want them around. But anyway, so he didn't want more children, and when my mother became pregnant with me, she tells me that he tried to talk me into, not me, tried to talk her into having an abortion, which she didn't. I really don't think, the truth is, there was a certain amount of anger from both of my parents for me existing, and a certain amount of punishment. My mother made it clear that, she tried to get away from him once, and he followed her to when she moved to Falls Church, Virginia, that was to get away from him, and he followed her. She said that when we tried to get away from him, I was worried about Daddy because I was afraid. Obviously, she'd been telling me since before I can remember that he had tried to kill himself. Did I mention that the last time that he tried to kill himself? He ran into a tree and ran his car into a tree. He didn't just run into a tree. He ran his car into a tree. Went through the windshield and ended up having 16 stitches in his neck.
Oh, no, that's really interesting. You've never said that before. I didn't know that had happened. That's interesting.
Yeah.
He actually, before my period of time memory, he tried to kill himself, which Mama told me often when I was growing up. What a thing to tell your child. Anyway, and had failed. He lived through it, obviously. But I was worried that he would try to kill himself if we left him. So I knew too much about my parents from a very early age, and I was the caretaker of my parents.
You hadn't mentioned that. I think you had mentioned that he was suicidal, not that he'd actually tried to kill himself.
I was not the child in the family. I was the adult in a lot of ways. And my parents loved me. I have no doubt they loved me. But, yeah. Anyway. So my father tried to talk my mother into having an abortion. Um, you know, I'm sure she wouldn't have had an abortion anyway, but there's a certain amount of defiance, my mother doing things just to be stubborn about it. My mother actually, brief touch on my mother's life, before she met my father, she was involved with a guy that my father called Deacon. I don't know what his name was. I don't know if that was a nickname or his real name, but his name was Deacon. And there were lots of arguments and jealousy about that. When my father would come home drunk and yell at my mother and all this stuff, one of the things he'd complain about was Deacon. So she was dating Deacon before she met my father. And it was during World War II, and he felt guilty for not being involved. He didn't ask her. He didn't tell her about this. Apparently they were pretty serious, and he didn't tell her. He joined the Coast Guard, and he got transferred to California, or he was in California with the Coast Guard. And he asked her if she would come out and marry him. And she, being stubborn to prove a point, said no, and he killed himself. So I think some of what happened with my father when she met him was not only rebound, but it was guilt. Rebound on my father's part, because he had been divorced from his first family, his first wife, and my mother had this issue with Deacon and having killed himself. And I think my parents were two people who probably should not have married, but they did love each other. They were just a really bad match. So, and I know what that's like. So anyway.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I think you might have hinted at some of this, but it's never come together in quite the way you're talking about before. So
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So,
It
anyway,
explains a lot about the way things went on later. So yeah.
The dynamics between my parents, and there was always this sort of love-hate relationship between the two of them, especially on my mother's part. But she's pretty much like that about everything. So anyway, so that's, yeah. So my mother got pregnant and my father tried to talk her into having an abortion, which of course she didn't do for a variety of reasons, including, just thumbing her nose at my father, because that's just how my mother was. And she tells me that when I was born, that, okay, these are the stories of me as a baby. When I was born, my mother had the doctor. She was. I don't remember if I was born at home or in a. But she didn't have any anesthetic when I was born, and she says that she grabbed the rails on the headboard and held onto those, when she was pushing and everything. And the doctor gave her a whiff of ether as anesthetic just before I was born to help with the pain, I guess. And my father's comment about that doctor was he was crazy. So, because I guess everybody back then got gas, I don't know. I don't know what childbirth was like in 1950. But anyway, so all she had was a whiff of ether. So when they brought me to her, she was a little high from the ether and hallucinating a little bit, and she thought that my bangs went all the way down to that my hairline was down at my eyebrows. And she said, she looked at me and thought, oh, my poor baby, but I'll love her anyway. And then later, of course, it turned out I had a normal hairline. She thought that my hairline started at my eyebrows and went back. So, and that she tried to nurse me, but that it tickled so much she couldn't stand it, so she put me on the bottle. So, anyway, after that, let's see, stories about my childhood that my parents tell me. There's the infamous one that my mother always told as a funny story until I was about 45, and I finally told her, Mama, you've been telling that story for years as if it's a cute childhood story, and it's not a funny story to me. And she just kind of went, well, and then never told the story again. But anyway, she had some black enamel paint. She'd painted something, I don't know what. And I was unsupervised a lot at home when I was little, apparently. So while my parents were at work, I got into the black enamel paint and decided to help out with the painting by painting the kitchen. And she said I put one stripe on the refrigerator and one stripe on the stove, and just kind of like that, like a child, because I was, at this time we were living in Washington D.C., so I was we moved to Falls Church when I was 2.5. I was actually born in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And I don't know how long we were there, but then my mother got the job as a librarian.
That's interesting. I didn't know you were actually born in Black Mountain, so that means we have much closer ties there than
Black Mountain, not Black Mountain, Burlington.
Sorry, my mother was born in Black Mountain. I was born in Burlington. I do that all the time. I even have one of the children's birth certificates. I have Black Mountain written down because I was goofy and Anyway, if you're not paying attention, Black Mountain, Burlington, they both start with a B. So, and it just comes out of my mouth sometimes. So, anyway, I was born in Burlington, and stories my mother tells about that, when they lived in Burlington, that my father would get drunk, and one time he came home and slashed up all her clothes. And she said she had 2 dresses to wear, and she would wear one to work, and then that night she would wash that dress and hang it up to dry and wear the other one to work the next day. So she had a lot of clothes because, she loved being a working woman and buying her own stuff. So, and also she says that at one point we were so broke that she pawned her wedding ring, which was actually, she had my grandmother's wedding band, which Julia now has, which is good. And she had a ring that...
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that Grandma had actually...
I don't know what she used, but she had another ring that was a silver ring that was hers. I don't think Daddy actually gave her a ring. She had a silver ring that had like turquoise stones in it. I don't know what happened to that. I have some jewelry that disappeared that I left at the house when your father and I separated, that he just let everybody get into everything. It was... he made no effort to look after the stuff I left behind at all. So, and I couldn't... Yeah, I don't know if I suspect kids got into much of the stuff, including, this is ironic because your Uncle Douglas, his high school ring, he kept losing it, and his parents, are telling Fosha, anyway, decided that he was too irresponsible, so they gave his ring to Richard. And when Richard and I started dating, Richard gave that ring to me, and I wore it for years. And then it's one of the things I stopped wearing it, obviously, after we'd separated, and it's one of the things I left in that my jewelry box at home. And Uncle Doug wrote me and said, wrote this story, that it was an email, this story, this whole thing about what had happened with the ring. He said, I think I'm mature enough now, can I have my ring back? I'd had it resized, for one thing, to fit my finger. And also, it disappeared with, including my baby ring. I had my mother, when I was born, she had a little ring that she bought for me that she would put on my finger and tie it around my wrist with a ribbon. So she'd lace a ribbon through the ring and then tie the ribbon around my wrist, keep the ring on. That has disappeared. Uncle Doug's ring. I just think it's really ironic that Richard gave me that ring, and because he didn't take care of my stuff, Uncle Doug lost his senior class ring. Anyway, but my mother's, the main ring, I think, was...
Well, it also says really weird things about him, that he waited until you separated from my father.
Yeah, it was like years later. It was like five years later or something.
That is just so him. Anyway, well, they're all weird, but anyway, please continue.
Yeah, they are.
So this was a silver ring with turquoise stones in it that I think that one actually disappeared. I lost it and found it again, I think. And that one disappeared. I think one of the grandchildren may have gotten into that one. So, because I lost some, I've occasionally lost things when grandchildren have been visiting. So, stuff happens. It's just stuff. And, I can't use it when I die, so who cares anyway. So, the only thing I really want to take with me when I die is my teeth. I want to make sure I have all my own teeth. No dentures. Anyway, but she mentioned that she had to pawn her wedding ring to buy me milk because we couldn't afford, milk to feed me. And she was able to get it back, obviously. But then, let's see. Let's see. So we lived in Burlington, then we lived in Washington, D.C. proper in an apartment building. And my father tells the story, both my parents told the story of my father coming home from work, and of course that babysitter got fired. Babysitter, and my father came home and said, where's Jody? Because my parents called me Jody. And he looked out the window, and I was up on the roof of the building. I was throwing gravel from the roof of the building. I'd climbed up the fire escape to the roof of the building, and when he looked out the window, I said, "Hi, Daddy," from the roof of the building. Which is probably why I'm afraid of heights. I'm sure that scared the living daylights out of him, and he put the fear of God in me for that, so I have a terror of heights now. Obviously, I didn't when I wasn't afraid of anything when I was a baby. Neither were you. Shut
up! Copyright 2017. Red Anvil Amalgamated LLC. For more of this and other worlds, visit redanvilcreative.com.
To fight the forces of evil!